they're always afraid of what's going to come and hurt them. And their CIOs, who they rely on, they don't know what's happening. They rely on some of these large organizations with big names and big brands. And ultimately, we are operating in the cyber world in a lot of unknown territory, and that's where I go in and I talk to the boards. I give them some advice on what's really happening in the world from the information which we gather from various intelligence agencies around the world, from vendors, from startups, from different sources. So in March and April of this year, I went out quite openly and I put out on my LinkedIn post that a global attack is imminent. And it's not something that I kind of guessed it. I gathered that information from my conversations and forums like this all around the world, where I've been traveling for about 12 to 18 months and participating in cybersecurity forums. And most of the analysts were predicting when the WannaCry attack happened around May, June this year, that's going to, and I said, look, most of the people were expecting, and it happened. Okay, so it's not that it's come out of the blue and people were caught by surprise. The reality of the situation is, even though people were expecting, it did the amount of damage. In 70 countries, facilities were shut down. As a preventive measure, offices were shut down, and there was a huge loss of revenue, which is beyond recognition and understanding at this point in time. Now, the direct impact has been 4 or 5 organizations that we know of, but the indirect impact has, because of that incident, just in May, June, that we predicted globally, that indirect impact has run into billions of dollars. Okay, why? Because we suspect an attack, we shut down our offices, we shut down our machines, and that has a productivity impact. Just in preparation of this session, at about 8 o'clock when the forum started, I got a dossier from the Silicon Valley on really what are the latest inventions that are happening in this space, and I'm going to share some of that information with you. But as far as Australia is concerned, in Australia, we are talking about it in many of the forums, but we are grossly underprepared. We are not underprepared for business as usual attacks. You know, if somebody is sending you a virus or whatever it is, you know, the antivirus program can take care of it. What we are underprepared is for attacks of organized crime, attacks that are perpetrated by states that are sponsoring some of these attacks. And that we are grossly underprepared because I think there are 2 reasons. One, we spend a lot less money than United States, China, and UK spend on some of these pre-planned, well-executed attacks. And number 2, we often think that, you know, other countries are a bigger target than we are, and therefore we kind of underestimate the impact. So as far as Australia is concerned, I collected some statistics for information. 65% of the organizations within Australia, large organizations, have experienced cyber attacks in the last 12 to 24 months, out of which 10% have reported that they had a loss of more than $1 million. Okay. Now, as far as critical infrastructure is concerned, which we always thought are impenetrable, because the operating technologies that run critical infrastructure and the information technologies, they were 2 separate systems. What has happened in the last 2 years is the operating technologies, which is OT and IT, they have converged. And as a result of that, the attacks on the critical infrastructure facilities has increased by 7-folds just in the last 2 years. Okay, so we have a reported 550 attacks, I think, from 150 or something like that, just a couple of years back. So there's a significant increase in attack on critical infrastructure. we don't, again, when I was a part of KPMG, and we did this for the Singaporean government, we would do a well-structured cyber resilience exercise where we will mimic a widespread cybersecurity attack. We will shut down banks, we will shut down emergency services, we will do that over a couple of hours, and we'll see how people respond to such emergency situations. Singapore has done it. A couple of European countries have done it very well. We in Australia don't do it. Don't ask me why, but we haven't done it. Okay, and so we need some of those sorts of things. The emergence of darknet, again, I said to some people whom I was speaking to last week, because we are getting so much of information thrown at us, most of the times we don't even see, and unless you're focusing on some of these things, you don't recognize that these attacks are actually happening all around us. The emergence of darknet and the impact of that on crime within Australia and the media coverage, and I don't want to take any names here, I don't want to give other criminals publicity, but if you just look at the newspapers of police raids and drugs and whatever, the last couple of weeks, you will see the use of darknet in extension of crime globally, which has again truly taken shape. So in Australia, we have a huge issue, and the biggest concern I have from a corporate point of view, and if you take the criminal element out, if you take law enforcement and regulation out, the biggest challenge I have, Australian boards are seriously underprepared to deal with a serious, planned, structured cyber attack. I've said this 2 years back, and the reason is very simple. It might be a very simple reason. And there have been multiple surveys that have been done. Watermark has done one, PwC has done another one, and there are multiple. Out of the ASX 100 Australian corporations that have been surveyed, 97% of the board directors don't have a technology background. All right? 60% of those 100 are either accountants or lawyers. And I mean, I've got lots of friends who are accountants and lawyers, but they are not necessarily that interested in cybersecurity and technology. Okay? So the reason why boards are unable to focus on cybersecurity and the risk to business, as the businesses are becoming more and more digitized, banking is all now tremendously reliant on digital technologies. Most of the industries will become digital. We lack skills at the senior most levels of the board and the executive to really deal with these problems. And that's what I help people recognize and help them address. So most of the boards, 90 to 95% of the people are basically technology, I would call them, the literacy of technology is fairly limited. And every time you talk to them about cybersecurity or protecting the business, it just goes this way. So what should we do? As far as Australian corporates are concerned, they need to really seriously look at the leadership teams that they're putting together. This is a business competence issue. This is a viability issue going forward for businesses. And again, I think that's where some energies and there needs to be some focus. So that is what I propagate, and I believe the threat to our businesses is more real than ever before, because as we are going up the chain on the curve of becoming more and more digitized, cybersecurity will become bigger and bigger problem. The latest issue, and that's the reason why I was speaking to some of my friends in the Silicon Valley, is not those programs that come and corrupt your systems. The latest issue that people are grappling with, that we saw with NotPetya and WannaCry, is files that cannot be traced. The chief strategy officer of Symantec has come out just a couple of weeks back and said the biggest threat to global cybersecurity are the files that cannot be traced, that are invisible. You don't even know that you are being attacked. That is the biggest threat to us. not knowing that you are being attacked. That is what I want to know more, and that's the reason why I'm collaborating with some of these large organizations coming out of the United States. Thank you very much, but we're very happy to take your questions.
So that's the sort of end of session one. We'll come back after the break in session two. But we've got a good 25 minutes for some quick Q&A. So really the intention was to open it up to you guys. Are there any questions? I've got a couple in mind just in case. No?
Mike Duro from the Warren Centre. Kumar, what exactly, could you enlarge on that last statement of yours? Files that cannot be traced, that are invisible so you don't even know you're being attacked. What does that mean?
So what it means is that there are attacks that are happening that directly attack your memory within your computer compared to, so usual attacks have been you introduce some kind of a malware into your computer system and you have a program and you can trace that program there. You write other programs to neutralize them. But when there is this systematic attack is happening where your memory and the CPU and others are attacked, then it is directly going to the heart of your ability to process. Now, it is executed in a certain manner in which you cannot really write any programs to neutralize it. So the organizations that we are working with are creating smart programs to look at the pattern through which these attacks happen, and they look at the CPU activity and then determine whether that attack has happened within that organization or not. So it's a very different way of disabling your systems, but I'm more than happy
so
to
that assumes that it's a rifle, not shotgun, at a specific target, does it? It's aimed at a specific company or organisation, not a fishing expedition.
It is well structured and well planned in most of the organizations.
So I would also just add to that in addition to that, one of the things that we will have as an ongoing challenge is that we are building very smart machines, very smart machine learning algorithms. More and more of the processing is going to be a black box. So in the future, you are going to rely on your ability to make decisions on a program that you probably need a PhD or multiple PhDs to be able to decipher. You're going to be putting your trust in a lot of this. One of the top cyber brass before Trump's administration came out saying that the next thing that we need to consider in this data-driven or data-informed world is integrity, the integrity of the information by which you rely on. And if our world is so super connected and that we are relying on information from all various sources to make these decisions, and programs are helping us do so, how do we get confidence in that information to make those decisions? And in this sort of environment where you have very smart people thinking on the alternative side, where they could actually take control of those programs or insert information in it such that you get a response that you're expecting a response, but you're not entirely sure of the quality of it. So these are some of the more advanced things that will come in the future. I think they're road testing them at the moment, and because of our distance in the community, I mean, I've seen this when I was in banking. It was reasonably well known that Eastern Europeans who purport to be the best software coders, and I think that's going to change, but they were actually using our environment here in Australia with the 4 big banks and the really reasonably digitally savvy financial system as a means to test a couple of new techniques. That's not unheard of. So these are the things that we need to be thinking about as we race towards advanced technology. It's not to say we shouldn't be advancing. We should be advancing with some thought.
Yeah. Frank, did you have any comments to that? I've got a question about follow-up that I'd like to hear from each of you, and then Rick's got a question as well. But maybe as a follow-up to that, because your question, Daniela, flagged this, and I'd be interested to hear from each of you about this notion of trust, the sort of role of trust in a cyber world. How, I mean, there's a famous New Yorker cartoon that's one of my favourites that, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Yeah. It was, I think, from about 1992, so it's quite an old cartoon. But you worked at a bank. The banks have I think, an increasing role in establishing that they can be trusted with your money, and they use technology to try and build that trust and gain that trust with you? How do we, and I hope that later with Rick and with Ralph that we can talk a little bit about some of the practicalities, but you've got some of this technology like blockchain that's sort of decentralising trust. Is there a role for trusted third parties, people? We're looking as a society, as a lawyer, I trust judges, I trust the court system, I trust the legislative system, I trust government, well, I trust government, but it's, I think there's a role for trust, but how does that move into a technology and cyber world?
I would just say it's sort of trivial or forced, but one on trust. Trust is inherently a social and political, it's a relational attribute. And so the notion that we can, in these increasingly complicated systems, hard code trust. There are programs, admirable programs here in Australia and the US, DARPA and others, for sort of trustworthy computing or trustworthy kernels. But as a toy example, think about, we're going to hard code humor into the firmware. It doesn't work, right? Humor we've recognized as an inherently social, inherently contextual aspect of our relationships or interactions. Trust is no different. The third parties that you trust is in part because of a history of relationships and experience. And so, not to discount or diminish the technical component of providing a basis for that trust, but I would suggest, biased as a social scientist, but that ignoring the social and political aspects of the consequences of lost trust, how trust is lost, perhaps irrespective of the hardware or software involved, is a critical component of addressing that aspect of the future we face.
And look, I think blockchain, as an example, is a response to, I think, an ecosystem and an environment where trust in some of these very old institutions is no longer at the same level. And what that's trying to do is decentralizing, and I'm not saying this is a model that will necessarily be perfect, it's not, it's got its issues like anything, but it's a representation of, banks being the center of trust for your financials and identity to an extent, although Australia Post has alternative ideas right now. Those sorts of entities are no longer, I think, bastions of trust. And so what the blockchain represents, among other things, is a means to say, you know what, I don't actually believe this entity is the sole mechanism of trust. I want to partly trust and verify using these other means. And I think increasingly we're going to find new methods that say, I want to place a modicum of trust on something, and I'm going to use these means to validate that as part of my process. Now, that's also inherently tricky because the way the blockchain is at the moment, researchers haven't really determined how to enforce the trust, or at least be able to prove it. So there's other mechanisms. They're looking at proof of work and all these other things to do so. And thanks for bringing up my microkernel. But there are things that we still need to do. But I think it's a response to society saying, we don't like this old world where we were forced to trust these institutions and groups. We want to find other ways. And Facebook is an example, right? We constantly tell people beware of strangers, and yet we have a mechanism now to engage with a broader stranger base, and they all could be dogs, right? So I think there are some really complicated mechanisms we have yet to really solve.
So I'll give you a little bit of information here, Hamish. Banking institutions are considered to be the pillars of trust. Yet in the last year or so, they paid almost $416 million in online fraudulent payments. All right, close to $500 million in Australia. $500 million is a lot of money. Okay. Now, so those breaches are again happening all around us. Why we don't know about them? Because we don't. When we read in the newspaper, it doesn't even get registered because we are not getting impacted. Bank is getting impacted. Yeah, that's fine. They'll fix it. They got lots of money. But the reality is, when our account gets impacted, that's when we take it seriously.
But we still have a bigger problem. Sorry, I was just going to say there's massive market failures in the cyber space, and that's one of them. It's the economic argument, right? So this is part of the reason why I think that we're a very immature industry. And while we talk about these threats and we encourage people to look at cybersecurity and apply these technologies and mechanisms, we're still a very young industry. We have still a long way to go. There's still a lot of friction in the things that we ask for people to apply. Anyone trying to do banking these days. And you know, if you've got multiple accounts, how many IDs and passwords and authentication tokens do you have? Probably giving a plug here for Rick and a few other things, but